In today's video, we'll look at endgames with the queen. We'll start with queen versus pawn, which is a very important endgame to understand. Queen versus one pawn is a solved endgame and should always be winning for the player with the queen. Let's start with the most fundamental example so we can understand the theory here. White has a queen. Black wants to escort their pawn to d1 and make a queen of their own. White needs to capture the pawn, but to do so they need to separate the black king from defense of the pawn. The technique for doing this is to get the queen like this in front of the pawn. Black now cannot move their king any closer and so cannot break through and promote the pawn. White will then bring their own king all the way down to c3 square. That means probably the black king could be like here, and to capture the pawn and deliver the king and queen mate technique. But what happens if the position is trickier, like this one? Is this position still winning for white? Black is one square away from making a queen of their own, protected by their king. It is actually still winning for white, but only if the pawn is on one of the B, D, E, or G files. The reason for this is that the technique required to separate the king from the pawn doesn't work if the pawn is an A, C, F, or H pawn. The technique begins. White plays a check, queen to e4. Let's say black plays king f2, at which point we play queen to d3, threatening to capture the pawn and stopping it from promoting. Black then plays king to e1, protecting the pawn, and then we play the check we need, queen to e3. This forces the king to d1. If king f1, we can just capture the pawn and we're winning. This forces the king to go to d1 instead. And again, the key is to bring the king all the way down to c3, and if the king moves like this, we can just capture it, and now we're winning again. The reason why that was a draw on the A and H files is that white can either force a stalemate or an endless loop of moves with no progress. Let's take a look to see what I'm talking about. Here, white has done the same thing of forcing the black king in front of its own pawn. Under normal circumstances, you'd start by bringing the king over to where the other pieces are. But if white moves their king in this situation, I don't know, king g7, then it's black to move, and black has no legal moves, but it's not in check, it's a stalemate. So instead, white has to move their queen, which means black can move their king again, and so on until both players give up and agree to draw. It's even more fascinating if it's a pawn on the C or F file. White seems to have done everything right and found the check they wanted, which should force the black king in front of their own pawn. But here, play king b1, queen b3 check, has to go into the corner. It could also go to c1, but then the king can just slide all the way down. But here is a ridiculous move for white. So it could go to c1, but that would just mean like a disadvantage because then they'll capture the pawn. So black sets a cunning stalemate trap with king to a1 actually, not for king to a1, abandoning the c pawn to die. It's like, hey, whatever, just take my pawn. But white captures the pawn, black to move, and black to move, and it's a stalemate. So white did everything right but failed because of the mysteries of board geometry.